Welcome to another deep dive from the creators at Webintelligency. You know, there is this massive and honestly sometimes terrifying gap between the pristine mission statement printed on your company's wall and what actually happens in your hallways.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge disconnect.
Right. And usually when we look at how a company operates, we pull up an organizational chart.
Hmm.
We look at the boxes, the reporting lines, the visible structure.
Yeah, the stuff you can put on a PowerPoint slide.
Exactly. But today, we are looking at the exact opposite. We are unpacking an organization's invisible architecture.
And that invisible architecture is, it's the ultimate diagnostic blind spot for most leadership teams.
Yeah, they don't even see it.
They really don't. So to understand it, we're exploring a strategic guide developed by Webintelligency. There are firms specializing in strategic consulting, competitive research, and behavioral change management.
And the document itself is fascinating.
It is. It's called Normalizing the Right Things, a Webintelligency strategic guide to behavioral diffusion, cultural engineering, and deviance mitigation.
I love that title. So our mission for this deep dive is to basically figure out the mechanics of how organizations unconsciously build habits. Because whether you realize it or not, they are always building habits.
Constantly. Yeah.
Right. And that can mean silently adopting world-class excellence or quietly drifting toward absolute catastrophe.
Which happens more often than people think.
Oh, for sure. So we are going to dig into the structural tools that you can use to actually engineer a workplace culture rather than just, letting it happen to you by accident.
And that really is the core premise here. Every single organization, regardless of industry or size, is in a constant state of normalizing something.
Like the system is always running.
Exactly. The underlying social transmission system never shuts off. And understanding the mechanics of that normalization process, well, that's what separates leadership that merely manages crises from leadership that prevents them in the first place.
Right. So let's start with how written rules silently transform into cultural reflexes. Because, nobody writes a corporate policy that says, please ignore the safety protocols on Tuesdays.
No, of course not.
Yet Tuesday rolls around and the protocols are bypassed. So how does that behavior actually take root?
Well, it takes root because normalization isn't driven by what leadership intends or even what they write in an employee handbook.
Right. The handbook means nothing if the behavior doesn't match.
Exactly. It is driven entirely by what leadership consistently models, what they reward, and crucially, what they tolerate.
What they look the other way on.
Yes. The system can normalize high standards of innovation just as easily as it normalizes negligence. It's a completely neutral mechanism.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's almost like walking through a forest.
Okay, I like that.
The first time someone takes a shortcut off the designated path,
Yeah.
they just bend a few branches, right?
Yeah, barely noticeable.
But after 100 people take that same shortcut, it becomes this packed dirt trail. And eventually, new employees arrive and they just assume the dirt trail is the actual path.
Because why wouldn't they?
Exactly. No one even remembers where the original safe path was. The most dangerous shortcuts are actually the ones that a manager gets promoted for taking.
That is a perfect mechanical analogy for what sociologist Diane Vaughan called the normalization of deviance.
Right, her work is foundational here.
It really is. She published this framework back in 1996, and it was following her landmark study of the 1986 NASA Challenger space shuttle disaster.
Oh, wow, yeah. The Challenger.
And what's fascinating here is when you look at the root cause of that tragedy, it wasn't some sudden, unpredictable sabotage.
Right. We all know the Challenger exploded due to a failure in the O-rings, which were sealing the solid rocket boosters.
Yeah.
But Vaughn's research really highlighted that the NASA engineers weren't, reckless villains.
No, not at all.
They didn't just wake up and decide to launch a shuttle they knew was going to explode.
Right. They were highly rational, dedicated professionals. But the problem was that over years of successful shuttle flights, they had gradually normalized a very dangerous design flaw.
Just slowly accepting a little more risk each time.
Exactly. In earlier flights, they noticed some unexpected erosion on the O-rings. But the shuttle didn't explode, it returned safely.
So the feedback loop was, hey, we got away with it.
Yes. Because they survived the anomaly, their perception of acceptable risk just naturally expanded. The margin of safety was absolutely compromised. But human psychology is tricky.
The brain just rewires it.
Exactly. The brain reclassified the damaged O-rings as a normal flight characteristic rather than a critical warning sign. Deviance becomes disaster through a long incubation of accumulated small tolerances, not sudden sabotage.
Because they didn't pay an immediate price for the deviation just became the new baseline.
Precisely. Familiarity literally blinds us to the structural risks.
So bringing this back to a business setting, if a manager routinely cuts corners on, say, quality assurance just to hit a quarterly deadline,
Right, happens all the time.
and their reward is a massive performance bonus, the organization is effectively broadcasting that corner cutting is the actual standard operating procedure.
Yes. Which brings up a really challenging reality for anyone listening right now. The most experienced people in your organization can, paradoxically, become your biggest blind spots.
Wait, really? The most experienced people?
Yeah. Because they have survived the local shortcuts for so long that they no longer possess the objectivity to see them as risks. It's just the water they swim in.
Wow, that raises a critical question for you, the listener.
Uh.
What are the behaviors your team is performing every day that you've just stopped talking about?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Like, what is the warning light that has been flickering for so long that it just blends into the background office lighting?
That's such a good way to phrase it. And if ignoring those small things leads to catastrophic deviance, we have to look at the other side of the coin.
How to actively engineer the positive stuff.
Exactly. How do we engineer positive behaviors to actually stick? For that, Webintelligency points to the positive counterpart here, which is Normalization Process Theory, or NPT.
NPT. This was developed by sociologists Carl R. May, Tracy Finch, and their colleagues, mostly in the 2000s, right?
Yes, exactly. 2003 to 2009 is when they really fleshed it out.
And it started in healthcare, if I remember correctly, but then evolved into a much broader organizational tool.
You're spot on. NPT maps out the mechanics of how a new practice gets embedded into the DNA of the daily grind. It argues that positive behavioral change requires 4 synchronized constructs.
4 pillars, basically.
Yes. And if any of these 4 are missing, the change will eventually fail.
Okay, let's go through them.
So the first is coherence. Basically, people have to make sense of why a new practice actually matters.
They need the why.
Right. It cannot just be a mandate. The underlying logic has to be understood.
So, say we are rolling out a new data security software. Coherence means the team understands the specific vulnerabilities that the software fixes, rather than just being told, IT said we have to install this.
Exactly, because I said so doesn't build coherence.
Makes sense. What's the second one?
The second construct is cognitive participation. This is where stakeholders actively commit to the initiative. They actually engage with it mentally.
They buy in.
Right. Third is collective action. And this refers to the actual, tangible daily tasks performed to enact the new standard.
The physical keystrokes changing, the new meetings on the calendar.
Exactly, the actual work. And finally, the fourth construct is reflexive monitoring.
Okay, meaning what?
Meaning evaluating and adjusting the intervention continuously based on real feedback from the people actually using it.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Because management can't just send out a memo, right?
Never works.
If leadership holds this massive Zoom meeting to explain the new software, they might achieve coherence. The team understands why it's happening.
Right, they check the first box.
But if middle management is passively nodding, yet their workflow metrics haven't been updated to accommodate the extra time the new software takes, that's a collective action failure.
Yeah.
The workflows literally clash.
That clash is exactly why Webintelligency uses NPT as a diagnostic instrument. Because when a change initiative stalls, NPT tells you precisely where the structural breakdown occurred.
It pinpoints the exact pillar that collapsed.
Yes. And to prevent those breakdowns during top-down infusion, they advise anchoring behavioral change in 3 specific implementation pillars.
Okay, what are those?
The first is high-visibility modeling by leadership.
Okay, wait, I want to challenge that for a second.
Sure.
Because the guide suggests that leaders shouldn't just model the final perfect behavior, but that they should visibly struggle with adopting the new process in public.
Yes, that's key.
But if I'm a senior VP and I'm publicly fumbling with a new project management tool in front of my team, doesn't that just undermine my authority? Like, why is broadcasting incompetence a good thing?
Well, it's not about broadcasting incompetence. It's about modeling the learning curve.
Okay.
Think about it. If a senior leader demands a new standard but hides their own learning process, employees feel this massive pressure to be perfect immediately.
Oh, I see. And that leads to people hiding their mistakes.
Exactly. If a VP fumbles the new software, acknowledges it openly, and asks for help, they are structurally lowering the social cost of failure.
They're making it okay to not know everything on day one.
Yes, they are proving that the struggle is normal, it's expected, and it's safe. That is how you actually secure that cognitive participation we talked about.
That makes total sense. It completely neutralizes the fear of the learning phase.
It does. Now, the second implementation pillar is incentive alignment, which we touched on earlier with your bonus example.
Right. You cannot demand a new behavior while your financial structure continues to reward the old one.
It's a classic disconnect. You tell your sales team to prioritize long-term client retention, but you base their commission entirely on first quarter acquisition.
The behavioral architecture is just fundamentally fighting the financial architecture.
Exactly. And the third pillar is consistent feedback loops. You have to catch early deviations before they calcify into a new old habit.
But, practically speaking, the biggest roadblock to getting that cognitive participation from the team is often just deeply entrenched office cynicism.
Oh, cynicism is a massive hurdle.
Right. You roll out the new initiative, and you can practically hear the collective sigh in the room. New protocols so often get dismissed as the flavor of the month. Why does that initial resistance happen almost automatically?
Webintelligency offers a profound reframing of this problem. They say that sarcasm and passive resistance are almost never personnel problems.
Wait, they aren't?
No, they are diagnostic signals.
Interesting.
When employees mock a new initiative, they are broadcasting a historical data set of broken promises. They are signaling a severe deficit of psychological safety.
It's a learned defense mechanism. An employee is essentially saying, I invested emotional energy into the last 3 change initiatives, and leadership abandoned them after 2 months. So I am protecting my time by assuming this one will fail too.
That is the absolute core of it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson published pioneering research on psychological safety back in 1999.
Right, that's a huge concept in management now.
Huge. And she defined it as a climate where people are comfortable being themselves, where no one fears punishment, humiliation, or career damage for speaking up with concerns, questions, or mistakes.
But if that safety isn't there, engaging with a new, untested process just feels structurally dangerous.
Exactly.
So you can't just mandate that people drop their cynicism and have a good attitude. What is the actual remedy here? How do you fix that?
Well, the first step is radical transparency. Management must openly acknowledge the ghosts of past failures and explain mechanically what is different this time.
Just put it all on the table.
Yes. But the most powerful tactical approach Webintelligency utilizes is the strategy called co-opting the critics.
Oh, this stood out to me. Because usually you want to silence the critics, right?
Right. The instinct is to sideline the loudest, most cynical skeptic in the department. But this approach says you actually pull them closer. You give that vocal resistor a structured platform to critique the plan.
You tell the skeptic, hey, you see the flaws in this workflow. Help us dismantle it and rebuild it.
Yes. When you address a known skeptic's specific practical objection and integrate their solution, that cynic transforms into your most credible advocate.
Because when they start championing the new process, the rest of the team listens. Everyone knows that person isn't just parroting the company line.
Exactly. They earn their credibility by complaining, and now they're using it to build consensus.
That is brilliant. But relying on people to speak up still requires an environment where they feel safe doing so. How do you actually track if that environment exists?
That's tricky.
Because traditional annual employee surveys are just frozen snapshots. They capture sentiment at a single, highly curated moment. And usually it's like a month after a crisis has already peaked.
Which is why Webintelligency relies on what they call sentinel analysis.
Sentinel analysis, what is that?
Think of it as a continuous digital stethoscope for organizational sentiment. Instead of asking people how they feel once a year, you analyze the metadata and linguistic patterns of internal communications.
You mean like Slack channels or project management updates?
Exactly. You use sentiment analysis on those platforms to track subtle shifts in tone over time.
But what does that look like mechanically? Because it sounds a little Big Brother.
Yeah.
How do you detect a tone shift without, reading everyone's private messages?
It's a fair concern, but it's about analyzing linguistic structures, not personal content.
Okay, give me an example.
For instance, you track the shift from active engaged verbs to passive resignation. If a team's communication pattern shifts from "let's debug this integration" to "just tell me what to upload," Sentinel analysis detects that drop in cognitive participation.
It flags when communication frequency around a new process suddenly falls off a cliff.
Exactly. So it provides real-time data indicating that a team is quietly disengaging. And that allows leadership to intervene long before that silence turns into a massive operational failure.
That's incredibly powerful, but obviously you have to balance that with total transparency so the team knows the tools are being used to fix the system, not to surveil their keystrokes.
Precisely. Trust is paramount. And once you establish that psychological safety, you then face the challenge of execution.
Because making people feel safe to speak up is great, it's foundational, but how do we make the right behavior the path of least resistance so they don't even have to think about it?
Right. You shouldn't have to rely on daily willpower for compliance.
And this brings us to choice architecture and nudge theory, which was introduced by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein.
A hugely important concept.
The fundamental argument here is that a neutral environment does not exist. The deliberate design of any system, whether it's physical or digital, inherently influences human behavior.
Absolutely. If you want to change behavior, you have to change the environment where the choices are made.
Let's ground that with a concrete example. So what does this all mean?
Okay.
It means if a critical safety check relies on an employee remembering to, open a separate binder and sign a piece of paper, you are relying entirely on cultural alignment and memory.
Which will eventually fail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if that safety check is an unavoidable hard-coded screen that must be filled out before the next page of the software loads, compliance isn't about willpower anymore. It's structural.
You have removed the friction for the correct choice and added insurmountable friction to the dangerous choice.
Right.
But, you engineer the environment to handle the how, but you still need to build the mental model for the why.
Okay, how do we do that without making people defensive?
To construct that mental model without triggering defensiveness, Webintelligency deploys a methodology created by cognitive psychologist Gary Klein. It's known as the pre-mortem.
Oh, the pre-mortem. This completely shifts the social dynamic of risk assessment.
It does. It's brilliant.
Usually a project manager sits at the head of the table and asks, does anyone see any risks? And nobody wants to be the rain cloud, so everyone stays quiet. Groupthink takes over.
It's the worst way to find flaws.
Right. But the pre-mortem inverts the timeline.
Yeah.
You walk into the room and say, okay, it is 1 year from now. This initiative has failed spectacularly. It is a complete disaster. Why did it fail?
Yes. It relies on prospective hindsight. By assuming the failure has already occurred, you completely remove the social stigma of criticizing the current plan.
Because it turns identifying flaws into a game. You are no longer being a troublemaker. You are enthusiastically performing the specific analytical job you were just assigned.
Exactly. Klein's research demonstrates that this technique improves a team's ability to predict reasons for failure by up to 30%.
30%. That's
Yeah.
massive. It just neutralizes the pressure of groupthink.
It creates a preemptive culture of risk identification. It systematically lowers the social costs of speaking up, which, as we saw with the Challenger disaster, is the ultimate defense against the normalization of deviance.
Okay, so let's say a leadership team has done all of this. They have their choice architecture dialed in. They ran their pre-mortems. They still face the reality of rolling a massive change out across an entire complex organization.
Yeah, the dreaded rollout.
And normally, when a sweeping mandate comes down from the executive suite, the corporate immune system flares up and attacks the new initiative. So how do we scale these behavioral changes without triggering a massive revolt?
Well, Webintelligency has an ultimate antidote to that organizational sarcasm. You avoid the revolt by refusing to launch a massive company-wide rollout in the first place.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Instead, they advocate for what they call the Lighthouse Incubator model.
The Lighthouse Incubator.
Yes. And this approach draws direct inspiration from the World Economic Forum's Global Lighthouse Network.
Ah, right. That was the WEF initiative that successfully scaled complex Fourth Industrial Revolution tech across, I think it was 189 different manufacturing sites globally.
Correct. And the WEF data proves something super counterintuitive. The most critical factor in scaling wasn't the technology itself.
What was it?
It was workforce engagement and the ability to learn continuously. The Lighthouse Incubator model adapts this by running a parallel, cross-functional proof-of-concept silo.
Let's paint a picture of how those mechanics work. Instead of a massive town hall meeting announcing a new mandate, you pull 10 people out of the main workflow.
Yes.
You put them in an autonomous silo, give them the necessary resources, and have them operate entirely under the new behavioral standards.
Exactly. And here is the crucial detail that makes it work. You do not measure the silo on process compliance.
Wait, really?
Really. The rest of the organization does not care if the incubator team filled out their new forms correctly. You measure them strictly on outputs, speed to market, error reduction rates, client satisfaction scores.
Oh, I see the brilliance of this. Output-oriented KPIs are the only metric that can actually cut through entrenched organizational sarcasm.
Because it relies on social proof rather than top-down authority.
Right. By framing this silo as an elite beta test rather than a punitive mandate, you change the psychology of the broader organization. The rest of the company watches the Lighthouse team.
And when they see that team achieving dramatically better results with less friction and fewer errors, the initial resentment transforms into curiosity, and then competitive envy.
The narrative shifts organically. Instead of the wider company complaining, we are being forced to adopt this annoying new system, they start asking, hey, when do we get access to the tools the Lighthouse team is using?
Exactly. When is it our turn? It creates a self-sustaining pull effect rather than a top-down push.
It's so smart.
There is a military adage: slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. The parallel, patient, evidence-building process of a Lighthouse incubator might seem slower initially than a company-wide mandate, but it isn't a detour around the resistance to change. It is the most direct, sustainable route through it.
Wow. We have covered incredible ground today, moving from the O-rings on the space shuttle to the digital stethoscopes of sentiment analysis.
We really have.
Let's distill this into actionable insights. For the leaders and managers listening, what are the core principles they can adopt tomorrow?
Drawing directly from the Webintelligency Guide's At a Glance section, there are 5 operational takeaways.
Okay, let's hear them.
Number 1, the normalization trap goes both ways. You normalize excellence and catastrophe with equal efficiency, based entirely on what leadership consistently models and tolerates.
Makes sense?
Number 2, deviance becomes disaster through a long incubation of silence and accumulated tolerances, not sudden sabotage.
The slow creep.
Exactly. Number 3, positive change requires 4 synchronized conditions: coherence, participation, action, and monitoring. People must understand why it matters, mentally commit to it, enact it daily, and monitor the feedback loops.
Right. If one fails, it all fails.
Number 4, sarcasm is a structural diagnostic signal of a psychological safety deficit, not a bad attitude.
That is such a perspective shift.
It really is. And finally, number 5, the Lighthouse Incubator uses visible results to convert skeptics, creating a self-sustaining pull toward the new standard.
Those are highly practical tools for tackling what usually feels like an abstract problem. And it's important to remind the listener that the concepts we explored today reflect the strategic approach of Webintelligency regarding behavioral change and organizational intelligence.
Absolutely. The document we analyzed actually serves as a powerful framework for in-depth professional lectures, as well as executive workshops tailored for management teams.
For those interested in decoding their own organization's invisible architecture, you can reach out to Amir L., the CEO of Webintelligency, directly.
Yes, his email is info@webintelligency.com.
That's info at webintelligency.com.
Oh.
There is also a wealth of information available on their website at www.webintelligency.com. They operate across Israel, the U.S., the GCC region, Europe, and East Asia, so they really have a global perspective on this.
They absolutely do.
Ultimately, it is all about ensuring that the right behaviors, the ones that actually protect and elevate your team, are the ones that stick.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought to consider as you observe your own team this week.
What's that?
The next time you see a colleague take a silent, convenient shortcut at work, ask yourself, are you just saving 5 minutes today? Or are you quietly laying the first brick of your organization's next disastrous normal?